My name is Lila Matthews. I was 28 when I pulled my late grandmother's old life insurance policy out of a trash bag my family had tied shut and left beside the kitchen door less than an hour after her funeral. My father had glanced at the folded document, laughed, and said it belonged with the junk mail. My older sister agreed so fast it felt practiced. They never even read it. They crumpled it, dropped it in the bag, and went back to arguing over Grandma Ruth's mirror and dining set. I should have let it go. I should have walked away and let grief numb me the way it seemed to numb everyone else. But I couldn't, because months earlier I had seen my grandmother smooth that same document across her lap with a kind of quiet certainty. Not sentiment, certainty. So when nobody was watching, I untied the bag, pushed past coffee grounds, wilted lilies, and greasy paper plates, and pulled the wrinkled policy back out. The moment I saw her signature, something cold moved through me. This wasn't trash. It was something they wanted gone before anyone could ask why. And when I opened the first page, I realized I wasn't holding an old policy. I was holding the first secret my family had tried to bury with her. Before I tell you what happened when I took it to the insurance company, tell me this. What time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The next morning, I spread the policy across my kitchen table and flattened every crease with both hands. There were 7 pages. The policy was older than I expected, updated more than once over the years, and ordinary enough at first glance that a careless family might dismiss it without reading. But clipped to the back were amendment dates, a beneficiary revision, and a handwritten reference number. On the visible summary line were the words that made my fingers go numb. Active benefit amount, $5 million. I read it 3 times before my chair scraped backward and nearly tipped over. My grandmother had never looked rich. She wore old sweaters, saved rubber bands, clipped coupons, and made everything last. But she planned quietly and stubbornly, and suddenly I understood why she used to say the loudest people in a family were rarely the ones protecting it. I drove downtown with the policy in a manila folder on the passenger seat. The insurance company was in a mirrored tower that looked too polished for my life to belong there. I almost turned around in the lobby, but then I remembered my father pushing the trash bag aside with his shoe and laughing, so I kept walking. At reception, I asked if someone could verify an old policy. 10 minutes later, a claims specialist named Jordan Reed led me into a glass-walled office. He looked composed until he opened the folder. He scanned the first page, paused, reread the number, and turned to page 3 and page 6. Then he asked, "Where did you get this?" I told him it belonged to my grandmother and that I found it after her funeral. He pressed a button, asked for legal intake forms, and said carefully, "This policy appears active. The benefit amount is $5 million, but there are irregularities we need to review immediately." When I asked what kind, he showed me page 4. One set of initials did not match the rest of my grandmother's signature pattern. "Someone may have tried to alter supporting information years ago," he said. "I'm not making a final fraud claim yet, but this document should never have been dismissed without review. At that point, the money mattered less than what it suggested. Someone in my family might not have ignored this policy. Someone might have tried to bury it." Jordan told me legal would need copies, death records, and proof of family relation. Then he said the one sentence that stayed with me all the way home. "Policies like this don't disappear by accident. Usually, someone benefits from confusion." I sat in my car for several minutes afterward, staring at the steering wheel and thinking about how my father always handled Grandma's bills to help her, while my sister liked to brag that she was the one Grandma trusted with errands and paperwork. I used to think that meant they cared more. Now I wondered if it only meant they had more access. When I got home, they were both in the living room, completely relaxed. My father was on his phone. My sister was painting her nails over a celebrity magazine. I stood in the doorway with the folder under my arm and said, "We need to talk about Grandma's policy." My father barely looked up. "That old thing? I told you, it was junk." I laid the folder on the coffee table and watched his face change when he saw the company forms. "It's active," I said. "It's worth $5 million. And according to the claims specialist, somebody may have tried to hide or alter it." Neither of them spoke for 2 full seconds. Then my sister sat up straight, all the color draining from her face. "If you found out your family threw away $5 million and maybe tried to keep you from knowing, would you confront them that same day?" Silence in a family can be louder than screaming. After I said $5 million, the room felt violent. My father set his phone down. My sister capped her nail polish and stared at me like I had ruined a scene she wanted to control. "That's not funny," she said. "Not impossible. Not how. Just not funny." Because ridicule was her first defense. I stayed standing and opened the folder 1 page at a time. "I didn't come home to joke. I came home to tell you the policy you threw away is valid. Legal has been involved. And Jordan Reed says someone may have tried to alter the records attached to it." My father leaned forward. "Who's Jordan Reed?" "The man who didn't throw it away before reading it," I said. My sister laughed, but it came out thin. "Lila, you always do this. You turn one thing into some giant dramatic event because you need attention." There it was, the old family pattern. She minimized, he redirected, and I was supposed to doubt myself. It had worked for years, but grief had stripped something out of me, and what remained was sharper. "No," I said. "What I do is notice things you both ignore until money shows up." My father stood trying to reclaim the room with posture. "Watch your tone." I met his eyes. "You don't get to tell me that after you threw away something Grandma kept protected for decades." He shifted tactics instantly. "If it's real, then it's family business. You should have brought it to me first." That told me more than any denial could have. He didn't ask if it was real. He wanted control. My sister jumped in. "Exactly. Why run to strangers?" "Grandma wouldn't want a scene." I stared at her. "Grandma also wouldn't want her documents thrown into a garbage bag next to paper plates." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what Grandma wanted." I touched the stack of pages. "Actually, I think this policy may be the first honest thing she left behind." That was when my father slipped. He muttered, "That policy was supposed to have been closed years ago." The second he said it, the room changed. My sister turned to him. So did I. He tried to backtrack. I mean, I assumed it had lapsed. But I heard the first version clearly. Supposed to have been closed. Not guessed. Supposed. "How would you know what it was supposed to be?" I asked. His face hardened. "Because I handled things for her." "Handled what exactly?" He stepped closer. "Everything you were too busy to help with. It was unfair, and he knew it. I had worked 2 jobs and still visited Grandma every week. But guilt was his favorite tool." My sister moved beside him. "Lila, stop acting like some detective. Grandma was old. There were papers everywhere. Nobody hid anything." I lifted page 4 and tapped the mismatched initials. "Then explain this." She looked at it, then at my father, then back at me too fast. "I don't know what that is." "Interesting," I said. "Jordan noticed it in less than 30 seconds. She snapped. "Grandma didn't leave anything for you, okay? She never would have. You always came around acting like you were special because you listened to her stories and brought soup when she was sick. That doesn't make you chosen. It makes you convenient." I let that sit. She wasn't upset about the document. She was upset that she might have misjudged her place. My father tried sounding reasonable next. "Everyone's emotional. We just buried your grandmother. Let's not tear each other apart over paperwork. We'll all go talk to Jordan tomorrow and get the facts." In another life, I might have accepted that. Now I heard the real meaning. Delay, regroup, calculate. Fine, I said, but I already gave the company copies. If anything happens to the original, legal still has records. My father's face shifted. My sister looked at him once more, and in that glance, I saw silent coordination. That night, I locked the original policy in a fireproof box and reread all 7 pages. At the bottom of page 5 was a notation: supplemental witness file attached to revision dated June 14th. Witnesses. Not confusion. Not a mistake. Deliberate action. Formally documented. I sat on my bed with the pages spread around me and remembered how Grandma used to squeeze my hand when my father interrupted her, like she hoped I would someday understand what she couldn't say aloud. By midnight, I knew tomorrow wasn't a family meeting. It was the first time the lies would have to stand in daylight. What do you think people do first when they realize the person they underestimated is now holding the evidence? We drove downtown the next morning in my father's SUV, and the silence felt practiced. My sister kept checking her phone and turning it face down. My father gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles stayed pale at every light. Nobody asked me for details because neither of them wanted information. They wanted control. At the insurance tower, Jordan was waiting in a conference room with a legal associate and a digital copy of the policy on a monitor. The room was polished and neutral, built to make conflict look civilized. It didn't work. Jordan greeted us politely, then looked more closely at my father. "Mr. Matthews, you were listed on prior household correspondence connected to Miss Ruth Keller's account history." My father gave a controlled smile. "I help my mother with her mail." Jordan nodded. "That may help us today." He placed the 7 pages in order on the table and said, "To avoid confusion, I'd like to review the policy chronologically. There are 7 relevant pages, and each tells us something different about the account." The structure changed the whole room. This was no longer a family argument. It was a record. Page 1 was the original policy issue. Page 2 showed premium continuity. Page 3 listed the early beneficiaries. Page 4 tightened the room. Jordan enlarged the amendment notation and said, "This revision file contains an inconsistency. The initials here do not align with Ms. Keller's prior authenticated signatures. More importantly, the requested beneficiary adjustment was never approved because verification failed." My father cleared his throat. "So it means nothing." Jordan turned to him. "It means someone attempted a change that did not go through." My sister asked, "Attempted by who?" Jordan folded his hands. "That is what legal may eventually determine, but the request appears to have originated from the household address on file at the time. Household. Not a stranger, not a clerical error. Household." My father shifted in his chair. "My mother was forgetful in her final years." Jordan answered immediately. "This revision was initiated 11 years ago, well before any record of cognitive decline." My sister's head turned sharply. "Are you saying someone in our family forged paperwork?" Jordan stayed calm. "I'm saying the company flagged an attempted change that was not authenticated, and the policy therefore remained governed by the last valid directive." He moved to page 5 and slid over 2 witness statements, one signed by a bank manager, the other by a notary. Both confirm my grandmother had reviewed and reaffirmed the policy years after the failed amendment and had been fully alert and explicit about her intentions. My father went still. "Intentions for whom?" Jordan looked at the paper, then at me. "We are not disclosing final distribution until review is complete. But I can confirm the valid directive did not follow the structure attempted in the failed amendment." My sister asked, "What structure?" This time, Jordan answered directly. "The failed amendment would have consolidated claim control through one adult child acting as administrative beneficiary." Nobody spoke. My father hadn't just known about the policy. He had tried to position himself over it. And judging by the look on my sister's face, she had just realized she might not have been his chosen partner after all. Then, Jordan lifted page 6. Ms. Keller added a restricted memorandum stating that if the policy was discovered after her death in the possession of anyone other than the named beneficiary, the company should document chain of custody carefully. I stopped breathing for a second. Grandma had expected this. She had known the document might be intercepted, hidden, or mishandled. Jordan continued. That memorandum is why legal asked me to document exactly how Ms. Matthews found the policy. My father's voice hardened. This is absurd. You're turning a misunderstanding into an accusation. Jordan met his gaze. No, sir. The paperwork did that. Then came page 7. Jordan set it in front of me without reading it aloud at first. It was a handwritten addendum attached to the valid witness file. In my grandmother's handwriting, it said, "If this reaches Lila, then she was the one who paid attention." That line hit harder than the money. My sister actually laughed in disbelief. What is this? Some sentimental note? Jordan said evenly, "It is a contemporaneous written explanation attached to the validated review file. It does not replace the contract, but it supports intent." My father pushed his chair back. "I want my attorney." Jordan nodded. "That is your right, but understand this clearly. No distribution will be discussed with anyone until the claim review is complete, and any evidence of document suppression could become relevant." We left the office with less certainty about the money and far more certainty about the betrayal. In the elevator, my sister turned on my father. "You told me Grandma's papers were a mess. You said nothing important was left." He didn't answer. "Did you try to change it?" she pressed. He snapped, "Lower your voice." Standing between them in that mirrored box, I realized the next phase would not be me against both of them. It would be every selfish person in the family recalculating their chances. Outside, my father said he needed to make calls and walked away. My sister watched him go, then looked at me with something rawser than anger. Fear. Not for me. For herself. What happens when the truth proves Grandma trusted the granddaughter they mocked more than the people who managed her life? 3 days later, the first real attack arrived by certified mail. It was from an attorney representing my father in matters related to potential estate confusion and disputed financial expectations. The letter did not openly accuse me of theft, but it came close enough to serve its purpose. It suggested I had improperly retained a financial instrument belonging to the wider family and warned against unilateral action. I read it at my kitchen counter while my coffee went cold, then laughed once because the audacity stripped away my last hesitation. My father was not confused. He was escalating. He had not apologized for the trash bag or explained the failed amendment. He had gone straight to intimidation. That same afternoon, Jordan called and asked me to come in immediately. At the office, he said, "Outside contact has already begun. We've received inquiries from counsel claiming there may be multiple family expectations around this policy, but expectation is not entitlement." Then he handed me another folder. Inside were archived call logs tied to Grandma's file. Years earlier, someone from her household had contacted the company several times, trying to discuss surrender value and administrative change options. The caller had been told repeatedly they lacked authority. One note stood out. "Son insists policy should be closed. Insured requests direct communication only. Son." I didn't need help translating that. My father had not tried once. He had kept circling the policy, testing doors, looking for a way in. When I asked why the company hadn't told the beneficiary back then, Jordan said, "Because the policy owner was still alive, and explicitly instructed them not to share details." My grandmother knew. She had known enough to block him, preserve witnesses, and write the memorandum. The fragile old woman's story had been useful to everyone except her. Then Jordan told me a distant relative named Denise Halpern had called, claiming she had concerns about undue influence in Grandma's late life decisions. I had met Denise twice in my life. She never knew anything unless somebody fed it to her. How would she even know? I asked. Jordan's expression answered before he did. Someone told her. My father. My sister. Maybe both. That evening, my sister came to my apartment alone, for the first time in months. She looked tired and stripped of polish. I almost didn't let her in, but I wanted to hear which version of herself she planned to bring. She stood in my kitchen and said, "Dad's losing it. He thinks if you cut him out, people will assume he stole from Grandma." I folded my arms. Did he? She didn't answer directly. You know how he is. He gets obsessed with control when he thinks something belongs to the family. That wasn't denial. It was biography. When I asked about Denise, she looked away. Dad called her. I only found out after. Maybe true, maybe partial. Then she cried. Not gracefully, just honestly broken. He promised me, she said, wiping her face, that if anything ever came from Grandma's files, he'd make sure I was taken care of. He said you never cared about money, so it wouldn't matter. I stared at her. You believed him? She gave a bitter laugh. I believed what was convenient. More honesty than I had heard from her in years. She admitted my father had talked about the policy for a long time like it was some future resource waiting to be unlocked. He had even said Grandma was stubborn for acting like money could solve character. That sounded exactly like him. I asked what mattered most. Did you ever take money from Grandma? She hesitated, then said, Not directly, but she paid my credit card twice when Dad asked her to help me. He told her I was drowning. I was struggling, but not the way he said. Then the rest came out. Designer spending hidden inside fake emergencies, late rent, quiet bailouts, and Grandma covering bills because she thought she was helping stabilize the family. He always told me not to tell you, she said. He said you'd judge me. He was right, I said. Not because you needed help, because you let him use Grandma like an ATM and called it love. 2 days later, there was a closed-door claims hearing at the insurance company's legal center. No public courtroom, no dramatic audience, just company counsel, claimant counsel, document specialists, and recorded testimony. It worked better than a courtroom ever could because nobody could perform for strangers. My father arrived with an attorney and the expression of a man who still thought confidence might save him. He claimed he had only tried to protect his mother from outdated commitments. Company counsel answered with the call logs, the failed amendment, the mismatched initials, the witness-confirmed reaffirmation, the restriction memorandum, and the documented chain of custody showing the policy had been recovered from trash after the funeral. Then Jordan read my grandmother's attached explanation into the record, including the line, "If this reaches Lila, then she was the one who paid attention." I will never forget my father's face at that moment. Not guilty. Exposed. The reviewer asked if he had ever tried to assume administrative control. He said no. They put the archived call note in front of him. He changed it to "not formally." They asked if he had encouraged his mother to surrender the policy. He said he had only discussed options. They asked if he had told the family the policy was worthless after the funeral. He said he didn't remember. My sister, called as a fact witness, admitted she heard him say the document should have been dealt with years ago. That line seemed to strip the air out of him. The final determination did not come on the spot, but the direction was obvious. The last valid directive stood. The failed amendment had no force. The claim would proceed according to verified beneficiary structure. Not noise, not pressure, not family expectation. Outside the hearing room, my father caught my arm and hissed, "You're blowing this apart for money." I pulled away. No, I'm blowing it apart because you spent years acting like Grandma's love was yours to manage. His attorney stepped in before he could answer. Good. Some words deserve to die unborn. Have you ever seen someone spend years building control, only to lose it the moment documents start speaking louder than they do? After the hearing, my father's image cracked fast. People like him survive on ambiguity. Once details become specific, admiration turns into distance. Denise withdrew her concerns within 2 days of realizing she might be questioned about where her information came from. My father's attorney began using language that sounded suspiciously like surrender disguised as dignity. My sister stopped defending him publicly and started telling relatives she had been misled too. I didn't correct her. Let her carry whatever softer version of shame she needed. Mine had been carried long enough for everyone else. At work, I moved through my shifts with detached clarity. Nights were harder. Nights were when memory stopped being evidence and became grief again. A week later, Jordan called with another update. The claim team wanted a final contextual interview with Margaret Ellis, a longtime friend of my grandmother's, identified by both witness records and outside contacts. I knew the name. Margaret was the one people always described as the friend who really knew Ruth. We met at a quiet cafe near the old neighborhood. She arrived in a camel coat with the expression of a woman who had spent years watching people underestimate her. She hugged me before we sat down and said, "Your grandmother expected this mess." I loved her immediately for saying the truth first. Over tea, she told me what the paperwork could not. My grandmother had grown worried during the years she stayed with my father, not because of dramatic abuse, but because of erosion, small controls, lost privacy, bills handled before she could review them, conversations interrupted, pressure disguised as help. Margaret said Grandma once told her, "They speak to me like I'm already gone whenever money enters the room." I felt that sentence like a bruise. Margaret also confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. My father had repeatedly urged Grandma to cash out or reduce the policy, arguing that real family needs money now, not after death. When she refused, he accused her of trusting paperwork more than people. My sister, meanwhile, had gone to Grandma for help so often that it had stopped looking like help and started looking like expectation. "Ruth loved your sister," Margaret said, but she saw clearly that love and responsibility were not being returned equally. Then Margaret took a small envelope from her bag. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten letter dated 2 years before Grandma died. Not a legal instrument, but unmistakably her voice. She wrote that she had preserved the policy because every time others reached into her future planning, Lila was the only one who asked what she wanted instead of what it was worth. I had to look away for a second because grief and vindication together can feel unbearable. Margaret waited, then tapped the page and said, "She also wrote this. If they become kind only when they smell money, then the money must never teach them they were right." That line changed everything. Until that moment, some small part of me had still imagined a softer ending. Maybe I would set something aside for my sister. Maybe I would pay one of my father's debts and call it my grandmother's final act of mercy. But hearing that sentence burned the softness away. Mercy had been weaponized against her for years. Every time she yielded, they called it family. Every time she resisted, they called her difficult. She had built this policy not only as protection, but as a final test of character. And they had failed it before the funeral flowers died. When I asked whether Grandma regretted helping them, Margaret shook her head. No, Ruth didn't regret being generous. She regretted confusing generosity with obligation. I wrote that sentence down the moment I got home. That evening, my sister called. I almost ignored it, but answered. "Dad may lose the house," she said. At first, I thought it was another ploy, but then she explained he had refinanced twice, taken on private debt, and been counting on future money he had no right to count on. Some of that debt, she admitted, came from years of covering family shortfalls, including hers. He thought once Grandma was gone, there'd be something to fix it, she said. He really believed it. So that was the real engine underneath all of this. Not just greed, dependency. A whole household built around anticipated rescue from a woman they patronized. And you? I asked. What did you believe? She was silent for a long time, then said, that somebody would always clean up the damage if I cried at the right time. Late honesty, still honesty. When the official claim determination finally arrived, I opened it alone. The final beneficiary structure directed full principal distribution to me, with no administrative control for my father and no legal basis for competing expectation claims from relatives. My grandmother had not split the policy equally. She had not rewarded noise. She had chosen one steward deliberately. I read the letter twice, set it on the table, and cried harder than I had at the funeral. Not because of the money, because for the first time in my life, someone in my family had seen exactly who everyone was and written the truth down where nobody could revise it later. My father called 6 times that night. I didn't answer. My sister texted, "Can we please talk before Dad does something stupid?" I believed he might. But I also knew this. Panic was finally living on the other side of the phone. If $5 million exposed the truth, what would you do next? Share it with the people who buried the policy? Or honor the woman who made sure they couldn't? The first time my father came to my door after the claim determination, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not older. Smaller. Like certainty had been taking up half his body for years and had suddenly moved out. He stood in my hallway holding a cheap grocery store bouquet, as if flowers could disguise desperation. I didn't invite him in right away. He looked past me into my apartment, probably searching for evidence that money had already changed me into the version of me he needed to believe in. But everything looked the same. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside only because I wanted to hear what shape his regret would take. He sat on the edge of the couch and apologized in the language of consequences, not conscience. He said he had handled things badly. He said grief had made everyone irrational. He said family should not be torn apart over misunderstandings. What he did not say was, I lied. I pressured her. I thought I could outlast her. That absence mattered more than every word he managed to say. When I didn't respond, he switched tactics. "You have to understand the pressure I was under." There it was. Debt. Bills. Responsibility. The burden of carrying everyone. He talked until self-defense blurred into pleading. Then I asked the one question that mattered. "When you said Grandma's policy should have been dealt with years ago, what did you mean?" He froze. "I meant it caused tension." I nodded. "No, you meant it stood between you and money you thought you deserved." He flinched because it was true and because I said it quietly. Quiet truth frightens manipulators more than anger. I handed him a copy of the determination. "She knew exactly who you were," I said, "and she planned accordingly." He looked down at it, and for one brief second real shame crossed his face. Then it vanished, replaced by need. "You can still help," he whispered. That was the moment I understood revenge wasn't screaming or forcing him to beg. It was letting him hear his worldview collapse. He had spent years believing love could be converted into access, that family titles outranked trust, that the loudest person in the room eventually won. And now he was sitting in my apartment asking the daughter he dismissed to rescue him from the consequences of how he treated the woman who believed in me. "No," I said. Just that. One syllable, no speech, no performance. He stared at me as if the word were foreign. "Lila." "No," I repeated. "I will pay for Grandma's headstone the way she wanted. restore the scholarship fund she once talked about, and secure my own future. But I am not going to use her last act of protection to reward the people she was protecting it from. He stood up, shaking with a kind of rage that had nowhere left to go. You think this makes you better than us? I met his eyes. No, I think it proves she was right about us. Ihor. He left the flowers behind. I threw them away after the door closed. My sister came 2 days later, and unlike my father, she did not pretend this was about principles. She cried before she even sat down. She admitted her marriage was unraveling, that her husband had discovered the debts, the lies, the quiet bailouts, and the fantasy she had been living under that some future inheritance would erase bad decisions. I know I don't deserve anything, she said, which already made her more honest than our father. But I need to know if there's any version of this where you don't hate me forever. That question reached somewhere softer in me than I wanted it to, but I told her the truth. I don't hate you forever, but I don't trust you now. And those are not the same problem. She cried harder at that than she had at the funeral. Good. Sometimes accuracy hurts more than cruelty. I told her what Margaret had said and what Grandma had written about kindness arriving only when money was near. My sister covered her face with both hands. She knew, she whispered. Yes, I said. She knew. In the weeks that followed, I made decisions slowly, the way Grandma would have. I paid off my student debt. I moved to a safer apartment. I funded the nursing scholarship in her name through the community college she used to support in $20 increments. I had her headstone redesigned because the one my father ordered was rushed, cheap, and misspelled her middle name. The day the new stone was installed, I stood there alone with white roses and read the inscription I had chosen. She saw clearly and loved wisely. Jordan later told me cases like ours often ended in compromise, emotional blackmail, or quiet redistribution behind closed doors. You did something rare, he said. You followed the intention instead of the pressure. I thanked him, but privately I knew the credit belonged to my grandmother. She had laid the path. I had only stopped letting people drag me off it. News kept drifting back to me whether I asked for it or not. My father put the house on the market after failing to refinance again. Relatives who once called him dependable now described him as secretive and difficult. My sister's husband filed for divorce after one final attempt at counseling. She moved into a smaller apartment, found full-time work, and for the first time in her life, began living inside numbers instead of excuses. One night she sent me a message that said, I finally understand the difference between being saved and being spared consequences. I didn't answer right away, but I kept the text. Growth does not erase damage. Still, it is something. Months later, I visited Grandma's grave on a quiet afternoon with no funeral crowd and no performance of grief for other people. I brought the scholarship brochure, a photo of the finished headstone, and a copy of the determination letter I no longer needed but wanted to show her anyway. I sat on the grass and thought about the trash bag, the 7 pages, the witnesses, the memorandum, the letter, and the years she spent protecting something nobody respected because it did not yet belong to them. My family thought they were throwing away junk. What they were really throwing away was the last chance they had to prove they deserved her trust. They failed. I didn't. And that is the part of the story I carry with me now. Not the $5 million, not the collapse, the clarity. Because once you see the real faces of the people who call themselves family, you never confuse noise with love again. Tell me in the comments, if you were Lila, would you have shared the money with them, or let Grandma's final decision stand exactly as she intended? At Revenge Argonne, our team works hard to create meaningful, well-crafted stories that are both engaging and thought-provoking. We want to make it clear that this is a fictional story, created to share valuable lessons and educational messages with our viewers. The villain in this story wasn't just selfish, They were manipulative enough to mistake love and trust for something they could control. That kind of betrayal cuts even deeper when it comes from family. If you were in Lila's position, how would you deal with someone like that? Would you forgive them, walk away, or make sure they face the consequences?